Hi, welcome back to yet another episode of The Valuable Conversation, where our today's guest is Dr. Nupur Shurti. I'll repeat. She is also a certified emotional intelligence trainer. And once again. She is also a certified, which means she teaches and understands about ये वाला पॉइंट में एक मिनट करना है। मैं एक बार फिर से एक शॉर्ट में रीटेक लेता हूँ, ट्राई करता हूँ। वेलकम बैक टू येट अनदर एपिसोड ऑफ द वैल्यूएबल कॉन्वर्सेशन, where our today's guest is Dr. Nupur Shurti. They have so much of confusion around, if I choose this, I'll be left out for this. Your advice for people who are into such situations currently?
It's not necessary everyone might have that clarity, right? So experimentation is required, and I don't think it is ever too late to experiment with your career. I mean, we have so many people who have changed their careers very late in life. If Monday morning you feel like, oh, it's Monday again, I don't want to go to job, and Monday blues, you should go and resign. The job is not for you.
People spend a lot of time trying to understand that one person, which is themselves. How is your experience and learning shaped around understanding these two behaviors, and what makes you passionate about it?
I never say that I teach behavior. Rather, I am a student of behavior, right? I'm studying behavior. Because human behavior and human emotions are such a complicated and complex thing that one lifetime is not enough to understand it completely. See, I always like to say that we are like iPhones. Great quality but limited storage, right? And what we do is we fill it all up with the emotions. We are not giving those emotions the outlet, right? But we don't have that much of storage. At some point of time, when that storage is full, it will come out. But then at that moment, the way it comes out will not be in your control.
Sometimes it's all about what's coming on the expression, but your mind, body and soul is aligned. You'll be able to still experience calmness without expressing.
There is a very interesting concept in emotional intelligence called emotional hijacking. So it's like your emotions have taken over you and they have hijacked your logical mind. This is something we are trying to avoid by routinely dealing with the emotions.
What are the traits that every student who is aspiring to become a good manager and a good leader should have?
I also believe that this knowledge of organizational behavior can be very helpful in making you a better leader and a better manager. See, what is leading a team? At the end of the day, leadership is influencing others' behaviors, right? I mean, we always teach this first definition of management. It is an art of getting things done from others. Why would others work for you? That art of getting things done from others requires a lot of influence, and that is where leadership comes into practice.
A corporate buzzword you wish you would quietly disappear for?
There is no place for emotions at workplace.
If emotion had job titles, which emotion would be the CEO of your life right now?
PPO, People's Patience Officer.
You get one billboard, what does it say in?
About me?
Yes.
Teaching is not a career, it's a lifestyle choice.
Hi, welcome back to yet another episode of The Valuable Conversation, where our today's guest is Dr. Nupur Shurti. She teaches HR and organization behavior at Narayana Business School. She is also a certified emotional intelligence trainer, which means she has spent years studying about how people feel and how people lead, and how rarely these two align with each other. Let's welcome our today's guest and get the conversation going while we deep dive into the organization behavior and about people.
Thank you so much, sir, for having me here. Looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Nupur ma'am, you study human behavior and emotion for a living and making lives. And people spend a lot of time trying to understand that one person, which is themselves. How is your experience and learning shaped around understanding these two behaviors so far, and what makes you passionate about it?
So, I never say that I teach behavior. Rather, I am a student of behavior, right? I'm studying behavior. Because human behavior and human emotions are such a complicated and complex thing that one lifetime is not enough to understand it completely. So I'm still learning every day. Every interaction with another human being teaches something about behavior. But it is truly important to dive into this, whatever your domain might be, when we talk about emotional intelligence and organizational behavior. You might start your careers in marketing, HR, finance, IT, operations, engineering, right? But at the end of the day, you are dealing with people. We are still not, we have still not reached a stage where robots have taken over and the human interaction is not there. You are dealing with other human beings, whether they are your customers, your teammates, your superiors, or your seniors. So, understanding human emotions and human behavior is an essential skill for every manager. And that is the reason that I always talk about these subjects, and that is the reason I got into these subjects. That it doesn't matter where you come from or what your dreams and goals are, this is something that you're going to need to learn. So,
Right. And even when you said humans are the one who are running this show currently, and even if machines and AI now coming into picture, we are discussing and figuring it out how we can make AI more humanized. Right. At the end of the day, it's all about humans that we want to do. So even in the age of machines and AI, we still want to figure out the human factor in each and every component that we do. So that remains the center of all the either the business or the society that we move around.
absolutely. And human beings at the end of the day are social animals, and that is not going to change. So,
So that makes me curious, ma'am. How did you uh, got your interest in one teaching, and second, why did you got into HR and teaching organization? Because a lot of students come and I think one of their biggest dilemma is to figure out where to begin and where to move on. How did you get into this journey?
first of all, talking about being a teacher, as a child, I never really gave a thought to it. But I am an elder sister, and I have a younger sister who I used to teach. So I always joke around, she is my first student. And so my teaching journey started by teaching my sister, right? But I never thought about making it professional. So, in my professional career, my teachers have played a big role. So, it was actually my principal from my graduation college who first realized that I have the knack, I have the skill for the career. And he suggested that I should look into it, or I should think about being a professor. And I liked the idea, I liked the notion of it, and I started exploring more about it. Nobody in my family is from the academic background, so I actually had no idea what to do, what options are there, nothing. But my principal guided me a lot, he gave me a lot of advice and mentoring and all. So I got into that idea, and he also gave me my first job. I mean, after completing MBA, I went back to him and I was like, sir, you did tell me that I should get into this profession and I want to. I don't know what to do. I've completed my studies, now you tell me. So he said that why don't you start with our own college? And it was a visiting professor job. I was given one subject to teach, but that got me started. And that day one, that first class that I went to, I instantly felt like I've been doing this for years, even though it was my first session. So I knew this is where I belonged and that this is my calling. So that's how I got into teaching. I've never looked back. I love this profession. I love being in the class.
So never you thought about what could be the opportunity cost? I mean, could there be any other possibility? Because when I interact with a lot of students these days, when they want to make that one decision of starting, they have so much of confusion around. If I choose this, I'll be left out for this. What is your advice to all those thoughts that come in that moment, which is very obvious, it will come for sure. But what is your advice for people who are into such situations currently?
It is good to experiment, and it's never late to experiment. So even I did a little bit of experiment while I was preparing for UGC NET after completing my MBA. I did try some corporate jobs just for a couple of months, nothing important, something here, something there. I never really fit in. So that those couple of months were enough for me to understand that okay, this is not for me. Okay, so that experimentation is required. I did it very initially in my career, and for me, when I started teaching, I instantly fell in love with this job. So it became clear to me that this is what I'm supposed to do. It's not necessary everyone might have that clarity, right? So experimentation is required, and I don't think it is ever too late to experiment with your career. I mean, we have so many people who have changed their careers very late in life, and then they have succeeded after that change. So that's always there. But one thing I always say to even the students that come to me is, it's very important to love your work. So if Monday morning you feel like, oh, it's Monday again, I don't want to go to job, and Monday blues, you should go and resign. The job is not for you. If you love your job, if you're excited to go to job every day, and you wake up with that energy that yes, I'm going to work on something I love, then you're doing the right thing.
But I also have a perspective on that. When people initially, you understand that whenever you do something, there are gonna be days where you would not be happy about it, because
Absolutely.
that job on the somebody who's executing that job requires a lot of discipline and determination to
Yes,
that.
yes.
And if that one fine day you are having a low moment and just you hit the job and you're not feeling good about it, and that happens today.
It
That
does,
if
it does.
some boss scolded or something happened, that client did not treat you well, people give up on their job next day.
They do, but this is where OB, organizational behavior and emotional intelligence, comes into picture. So, am I down because I don't like the work I'm doing and I hate the job I'm doing, or I'm not feeling good because something happened? If it is because of that one instance, which is a rarity, or which is not something that will continue to happen. So it's like, is my moment bad or is my day bad? Right? Just because I'm having a bad 1 hour, it doesn't make my entire career and my life bad. But then you need the skill of emotional intelligence to actually have that self awareness of what am I doing, and is it about just one moment or about the entire life, right? Burnout, stress is a part of every job, every job. But if you are passionate about your work, you will deal with that burnout also, and then you will take it as a challenge and excitement on, I want to prove myself. But if you don't like your job, if you're not passionate about your work, even the day to day would feel boring and a burden to you, right?
Ma'am, I would like to anchor upon the word emotional intelligence that you used in the conversation. And since you are a certified emotional intelligence trainer, uh, talk to us about how people think people should not be. So at workplace, people think that you should not be emotional. That's what most of the time people say. You cannot cry, you cannot you cannot
You cannot.
express sadness directly and stuff like that. Uh, what do you have to say about emotional intelligence, the importance of emotional intelligence today, and how is today as a society, are we good or bad at it?
We have all heard, leave your emotions outside the door. There is no space for emotions in the corporate world, right? But I read a research which said that on an average, human beings experience 400 emotions a day.
400.
Exactly. And we spend most of our day at work. I mean, we don't have a switch on, switch off button. The more we try to suppress those emotions and refuse that experience, the more it is going to become problem, right? So emotional intelligence is not about feeling a lot of emotions or not feeling those emotions. It is about understanding emotions and trying to manage them. And I don't like to use the word control when it comes to emotional intelligence. We are not controlling emotions. That's the problem. We try to suppress it and control it a little too much, and then it bursts out like a volcano, right?
And
So
for people to understand a little deeper,
yeah.
how is this different? So, example, can you share one example how you control an emotion or how you manage your emotion?
Absolutely. So, see, it's not heart versus mind. Head versus heart nahi hai. It's the balance of both. So, emotional intelligence is when you balance both without letting your emotions overpower you, but you are also managing them. So, what we generally do is, if let's take an example of what our students very routinely face, or what we can routinely face in the corporates. Now, I'm in the classroom. Some student is continuously talking and being mischievous in the class. It's very obvious for me to feel that anger, right? Now, if I try to control the anger and suppress that anger, no, I don't have to be angry, I don't have to be angry, I don't have to be angry. It will come out and it will burst out so that I will scold that child, but it will not have an effect because it is burst out like a volcano. That person, that student would feel very disrespectful. I might become rude in that moment because the emotion has taken over. I have been trying to suppress it so much that now it has taken over me. And I might become very rude to that student, right? Instead, if I can understand that, okay, this action, this behavior of a student is making me angry. I know I am angry. I have understood that anger, and instead of trying to suppress it, I am trying to deal with it. I am giving it an outlet, but that outlet is in my control. So I'm not controlling the emotion, I'm controlling the way it comes out of me. And that is emotional intelligence. So now when I scold that child, it will be in my control. The words are in my control. The emotion hasn't taken over me. And then I'll be able to explain to that student why it is wrong, whatever he is doing in the class. He'll understand without being without feeling like I'm disrespecting him. And I will not be rude, but I will be more understanding of why he was talking or why he was misbehaving in the class, right? So this is the difference.
So I think greatly mentioned. We have heard about that story of the cockroach in the restaurant, and how a skilled person who understands to deal with the situation is able to manage the situation better. In fact, I was also reading somewhere, it was mentioned that, you know, for people who are very sad in their bad moments, it's not so how to practice and be a better person in managing your emotions is, can you be calm when you are very happy? So for mind, both of them are agitations in mind, right? You know, be it you're very happy or you're very sad, both are agitations to mind. And if you are able to practice calmness in the moment of your extreme achievement, success, or maybe it's not that you want to be happy, you can still be happy without going mad.
Exactly.
Right. So once you start practicing this,
Yes.
automatically you will be able to handle the moment of sadness or depression much better.
Absolutely, because you are experiencing the emotion, you are not refusing that emotion, but the emotion doesn't control you,
Yeah.
right?
And you are able to, I think we are able to internalize that way more rather than
Exactly.
it's sometimes it's all about what's coming on the expression, but eventually as you grow in life, if your mind body is aligned, your mind body and soul is aligned, you'll be able to still experience calmness without expressing.
Exactly. And see, I always like to say that we are like iPhones. Great quality but limited storage, right? And what we do is we fill it all up with the emotions. We are not giving those emotions the outlet, right? But we don't have that much of storage. At some point of time, when that storage is full, it will come out. But then at that moment, the way it comes out will not be in your control. But if you deal with it on regular basis instead of just putting everything in there, then you are in control of the way it comes out. So it is about giving your emotions an outlet, but that outlet is the what you decide. So emotions don't control you. There is a very interesting concept in emotional intelligence called emotional hijacking. So it's like your emotions have taken over you and they have hijacked your logical mind. This is something we are trying to avoid by routinely dealing with the emotions. So my
I think a
logic
lot of
is
people
still there.
keep on hijacking you every day.
Every day. I mean, something. It's simple road rage. Somebody will overtake you or cut in a very bad manner, and that anger will come out of you. Or somebody will say something at the workplace, or some customer has said something, some boss says something, and suddenly you become so angry. But in that moment, when whatever you do, your actions are purely controlled by the emotion. You have completely forgotten your logical mind. Even that is not emotional intelligence. It is, as I said, it's not head versus heart. It is a balance of logic and emotions. If you can keep this balance, you are a very highly emotionally intelligent person.
Interesting, ma'am. So ma'am, moving on to the next question that I have is, you are teaching so many students every day, day in, day out. and you're also somehow able to figure out which student could be a better, because you understand organization behavior, leadership. You certainly understand the trait of student who can potentially become a good manager or a good leader. What are some of the traits that you think a good manager or a good leader should have in today's time, especially, and being practical, because the world out there is very ruthless and very competitive. Considering that in the picture, and not just we're talking about good things, but in your sense, what are the traits that every student who is aspiring to become a good manager and a good leader should have?
I don't think being a good leader or a good manager is more about having certain personality traits, but more about having certain skills, right? So, yes, I do believe emotional intelligence is quite an important skill for being a good manager or a leader. I also believe that this knowledge of organizational behavior can be very helpful in making you a better leader and a better manager. Because when we say organizational behavior, I understand why people behave in a certain manner, their perceptions, their attitudes. I can understand their stereotypes and I biases, all of that. And then I can use those to change the behavior, right? So once you understand what drives human behavior, you can then see what is leading a team. At the end of the day, leadership is influencing others' behaviors, right? I mean, we always teach this first definition of management. No? It is an art of getting things done from others. This is the first thing. Why would others work for you? That art of getting things done from others requires a lot of influence, and that is where leadership comes into practice. And you cannot influence somebody if you don't understand why they behave the way they behave. And organizational behavior gives you that understanding. The perceptions, motivations, attitudes of the people, their biases and stereotypes with which they are coming forward, right? If you can't deal with these things, you cannot influence their behaviors or their actions. So, you say good leaders are the leaders who will make you do things that they want, but you will feel like, oh, it was always your decision.
You discovered yourself in that moment, right? I also saw that you are very, and in your career, despite you have been teaching HR, but equally you have been, almost everywhere where you have worked. You have continued to work on events and event management and the cultural committees around. And even at Narayana, you headed the cultural committee of NBS, and now you look at the entire cohort of activity coordinator. Tell us about how do you think that helps a student to learn in that journey, and how important it is?
I've always believed that teaching or learning cannot be limited to the four walls of classroom. And events give these opportunities to students where they can where they can practice whatever they have learned in the classroom. Those hands-on experiences that we talk about, events are a good way of doing that. Along with that, events are also a good way for students to explore their own selves, their limits, what they are capable of doing and what not, outside the realm of the books, right? And that leads to a lot of skill development as well as personality development for the students. These are the times and the opportunities, the events, whatever clubs it might be, but the events basically give an opportunity to students to push their own limits, to try things with whether I like it or not, whether I am comfortable doing this or not. What are my strengths and weaknesses? The students can identify that while working on events. And especially at Narayana, we have the concept of student-led clubs, right? So everything from planning to execution, everything is done by students. So that's a great way for them to put all the theories they are studying into practice.
And I also think while we are looking at learnings in specific classes or books, learnings are all around so it's like just the way we saw that, that learning is everywhere. Three dates में ही बोल दिया, जहाँ भी जाओ वहाँ. So somebody who's a learner will understand that learning is everywhere. And when people manage some event or do some work, whatever you do, if you have a knack of looking at and observing things and understanding from it, learning is everywhere. When you are organizing any cultural events, managing it on time, arranging the resources, managing so many people around that, managing ensuring that there is no chaos and everything. But there is so much to learn in that. Often people consider these activities as a specialized activities, but these are also very life-centric activities, which in general will teach you. And that's why I think clubs at NBS are one of the most popular things. And uh, those members who are a part of the club and have been doing this with even whatever they are studying, finance, IT, operation, HR, marketing, but they will have a life skill attached to them where they'll be able to understand the world and people better. I think that's great, and um, kudos that these kind of interests and activities mentored by you and a lot of other faculties here give direction to students, and I think they discover themselves in that process.
Right. I mean, when a student is organizing a Navratri event, it's not about a cultural event of Navratri. A lot of operational things go into organizing it. A lot of leadership skills are learned while organizing it, right? A lot of planning and budgeting goes into it. A lot of resource allocation and resource utilization goes into it. Isn't that what management is? I mean, that's what we are trying to teach to our students. So,
Combining your experience with organization behavior, emotional intelligence. I'm coming to Gen Z. uh, it's been talked about everywhere, and that people are struggling, organizations are struggling working with this Gen Z. However, I come from a point of view that this is the generation which is hitting the workforce. Organizations will have to deal to work with them, and somehow, so my point of view and my POV is more focused towards how do we understand to work with this generation rather than arguing about what's the challenge, and also to have a different lens to look at it. Maybe it's just the generation gap in the organization behavior. So, what is your opinion about this? That how should organizations today? So, from both the sides, I would want to have your POV. One from an organization point of view, what should they try to incorporate in their organization, which takes care of the demands of the Gen Z, and also, of course, Gen Z has to understand certain aspects of the organizations and the way organizations work versus what their value system could be. How do you think these two can come and align with each other?
every generation, I think, thinks that the generation after them is not good enough, not hardworking enough, not smart enough, right? And that generational gap exists every time. Every time a new generation enters into a workforce, they bring with them certain changes. I think with Gen Z, what is happening is because we live in the world of social media and every generation is on social media today, that's why a lot of it is being discussed. That doesn't mean that previous generations did not have a problem. When millennials entered into the workforce, Gen X and boomers had the same problem, that they are not good enough, right? And this continues. It is just that now a lot is being discussed and talked about this because platforms like that exist. Having said that, Generation Z have their own strengths and weaknesses, right? Their own challenges and their own advantages. They will bring a change in the workforce. Right now, they are at the entry levels. The more Generation Zs get on the leadership roles, they will bring about those changes in the organizations that are required. I think one of the things that Generation Z demands from the organization is, this is not the generation that only wants to work for just some incentives or just some salary. They're demanding flexibility, they're demanding value and respect. This is the generation that is demanding some meaningful work, right? They want to understand why I am doing something that I am doing. So this generation is actively challenging the yes boss culture that the previous generations had, right? And nothing wrong in that, but this is a change that as an organization will have to bring about this change if they want more and more Generation Z people to work and work efficiently. They will have to provide these things to the employees. Having said that, Generation Z, also the employees of Gen Z also need to understand the values and the goals and the vision of the organization. They have to come out of their limited worldview, right? And think about what is better for the organization as a whole, right? Unless both of them can have this empathy for each other, understand each other, that collaboration is not possible.
We consider classrooms to be a two-way learning place, and a lot of experiences are being shared and received from the students' experiences. Can you remember of a time when you entered into a classroom with some preconceived notion, confident, and you and that thing was challenged from a classroom, and you learned something out of it?
That has happened more frequently than you would think. At the end of the day, we learn from each other, right? So every student teaches us also something in return, and students can really surprise you. Sometimes it happens, we go in the classrooms with certain judgments, and we are very quick to judge the potentials and the calibers of the student. But I have seen it many times that students can really surprise you with their performances. I mean, I remember this is just a few years back, and this was during one of the events. We talked about the clubs at NBS, right? So, cultural committee, I was heading cultural committee back then, and we were organizing the event of Navratri for the students. Now before the event day, there were the usual conflicts amongst the teams, and blame games and buck passing of the task, and all of that was going on. I was feeling a little frustrated with the team not being able to collaborate with each other, and frankly, I wasn't sure about how they're going to manage the entire thing. Of course, as club leaders here at NBS, we want the students to take the lead. I was trying to do that. So I was just guiding them and monitoring them. They were doing the work along with all the fights and all. Then the day of the event comes. Those smaller here and there, certain challenges here, certain challenges there are going on, and I'm trying to solve things around. And around 1 or 2 hours into the event, and I was like a little tired, I was a little hungry, and I go to the food stall. We had certain food stalls arranged from outside, and I see one of the club members is on the other side of the stall. He is drenched in sweat, bichara, from top to bottom, and he is helping cook, fry the bread, and he's making vada pav and making dabeli, and he's serving the students. And I was like, what is happening? Why are you at a food stall? It was not a college stall. We had organized a sponsor for it. Sponsor did not understand the amount of crowd that we had, and so he only brought one person to manage the entire stall. The crowd was increasing, people were not able to get the food really quickly, and this student on that moment decided that, listen, we have to do something about it. He didn't contact me or anyone else. He did not tell me that this is the problem or what to do. No. The first thing he did was, it's the day of the event, the show must go on, I have to solve this. Without even thinking twice, he offered his services, and he's like, okay, you are understaffed, I'm going to come and help you with the cooking and everything. It was not his job. He still did that, and that approach of the show must go on, right? I never thought, from all the conflicts that I have been resolving before that, I never thought that the students would have this kind of commitment.
Yes.
Accountability, commitment, and this all-in approach that, okay, at this moment I have to resolve this, right? And this is just one incident, but I have seen this so many times in many different club activities. So they can surprise you, and it's great. I mean, this is, and I learned here this approach that show must go on. Everything else comes later. That is something I have learned from my students.
I absolutely agree to you. I think one of the blessings is to be surrounded by young energy and people. I have spent years into corporates. Obviously, we also had a lot of youngsters working in the team and stuff. But the kind of energy that you get at a campus, at a B school, the vibrancy of thoughts, I think I appreciate a lot of startups to fuel that, but I also do not appreciate a lot of startups who kills that. I just hope that, and I'm a big believer of, so like we were talking, a lot of people who went on to this bigger organization where they felt left behind in terms of the environment that they wanted to contribute the best, they have built startups and they have ensured to make their workplaces and environment so conducive to the people who want to come and contribute so that the more focus is towards the productivity, the passion, and not toward. मैं कहता हूँ कि sometimes it's not the work that is becoming a problem, it's everything else around the work that makes the work so much problematic, and that's what bad organizations do. uh, the people, the managers, the organizations create so much of chaos around everything else that's happening around the work that the works get suffered. And a lot of people who are able to not provide so fancy offices, not provide so something, but they just are providing the right mix of thing that is required to fuel that passion, and they're able to achieve that. That's why startups are doing great. That's why corporates who have evolved to understand this are doing great. And I think this is what needs to be learned to all the managers and leaders who are looking forward to, if they have to grow future in their career, they'll have to welcome this change. Otherwise, there is a book called Innovator's Dilemma. So everything, the startups and others will take over this opportunity, and they'll have to face that.
Correct, correct. It's culture at the end of the day that drives your strategies, right? So you might have the best of the product and the best of the strategy, but if the culture doesn't bring the energy and the passion into it, it's not going to work. And I think that's where Gen Zs also come into picture. They bring that youthful energy into the classrooms, into the organizations, right? And that's the best part about being a professor. You are interacting with the new generation every year. It keeps you on your toes, it keeps you young and youthful. And that energy that the youngsters bring, the Generation Z brings, I think the startups are, you well said. I mean, startups are really using that and encashing on that, and that is giving them the momentum that they want and need, right? And the bigger organizations also need to understand that.
Yeah, startups are challenging the hirings. People are more interested to work for startup than our big organizations. Application numbers are dropping at the corporates. It's increasing at the startups, and even MSME is now coming into picture. And they have a lot to offer to the people who is looking forward to an opportunity.
Correct. And as we discussed, Generation Z is not looking only for money. They don't want to work only for money. They want purpose, passion, drive. They want meaningful work. And startups are able to provide all of these.
Right. I remember, ma'am, when in our days, I am recalling a conversation of a manager who says, विशाल हमें ना ऐसे ज़रूरतमंद लोग को हायर करना है जिनकी मजबूरी हो काम करना. I still remember that conversation, and I said, while I understood their point of view that when you are in need of money, when you have some restriction, you always forget everything else and you push yourself. Why I completely get that point of view, but I said that's not all the kind of workforce you'll get. There are people who would not want to work just for the money and only when they want it because they are in a problem or some situation of a money. You have to offer something more to the organization. Because you are not offering something more, you are just looking at something कि मजबूरी हो तो काम करेगा. So I think that's what exactly is the challenge. And because there were lesser options earlier, people were still doing it. Now when people have options, people are obviously choosing the better options.
You're right that people will work for needing something, right? But that will not always be money. That is something that the bigger corporates need to understand, and I think startups understand that very well, that everyone needs something, but it is not necessarily money. So if you understand what people need, you can really motivate them to work. So
anchoring onto that conversation, ma'am, you meet students, new students every year, and you have seen classes for so many years, aspirants for so many years. My question to you is, what has remained constant, or I would say what has become better in classrooms with the passage of years and batches, and what do you think is degrading in the classrooms year on year?
at a more rudimentary level, student mindset is always the same. You know, at the end of the day, they are students. Whatever age groups I have dealt with, whatever generations I have dealt with so far in so many years, that basic mindset doesn't change. So they're always trying to get the better out of their teachers, and they're always trying to find ways to, get off without doing too much work on their assignments and tasks and projects and all. those things are always there, right?
That's the student kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah, that student mentality will remain the same. Some favorite teachers, some not so favorite teachers. Those things will always be there. That's a part of being a student. We did it. Generations that are going to come now are also going to do that. So at a very basic level, students are students, right? That's not going to change. But one positive change I have seen with the passing of time is that now students are more well informed, because so much of information about everything that is happening in the world is available at just the tips of their fingers, right? So they have a lot of information. They may not know how to process this information and how to use this information, but they are well informed, right? So and they expect the teachers also to be well informed. They are not going to be happy and satisfied with the basics. They want the teachers to also bring in that addition, because they're getting so much from the world around. I mean, everywhere they go, there is learning opportunities. There is news is now not just in newspapers. With the click of a fingertip, there are articles in newspapers, podcasts are there. So there is a lot of learning options for them besides classroom.
Yeah, classroom is no more for knowledge gathering now.
Correct. So in a way, it's a very good thing, because that challenges us as professors, keeps us on our toes, and as teachers we will have to understand that and change along with the times. So yes, the students are well informed and they are demanding more and more, and this is, I'm saying in a very positive manner, that they should, right? So absolutely a very good positive change in the past years that I've seen.
And what do you think is depreciating in classrooms?
Definitely attention span. Absolutely. I mean, it's getting more and more difficult to engage the classroom for an entire 1 hour. We have 1 hour sessions, right? And most of the colleges have this. But it gets difficult every year to engage them for that entire 1 year. Also, somehow, one more thing that is changing in the last few years, I have seen creativity deducting or reducing a little bit, right? And that is something I don't really like. So that is one thing if we can work on.
Very well said that the attention span is decreasing. Now there is an increased access of information through
Yes.
technology, through now you have AI. पहले तो Google पे जाके you had to search and figure out which article and which link to click and read. Now you have AI and
doing that.
GPTs to give you a straight answer to a certain
Correct.
context. So how do you think teachers in coming ages will have to focus upon? Because you must be also trying to evolve and trying to catch the attention of people.
Yes, you have to.
What is your understanding about how the future of classrooms would be like, and what would matter the most in the classroom in future?
So a lot has changed and a lot is going to change. I mean, personally for me, when I was a student, presentations were such a new thing. Creating PPTs and giving presentations was such a new thing, and if your college
All the
was,
consultants are known about that, they give presentations,
Yes.
business
And-
presentations and stuff.
as a college, if your college is teaching you how to give presentations, that was considered a huge thing, right? So I come from that generation, but I cannot continue that mindset now, right? I mean, today's students have smart classes, AI. So change is inevitable for any professor, just like any other industry. If you do not evolve, if you do not upskill, if you do not change, you cannot be a good teacher. I mean, a lot of concepts that I have learned as a student in my subjects in HR and OB do not apply anymore. And a lot of new concepts have come up which every organization is applying. So if I don't upskill myself, if I don't evolve that knowledge that I have, it's not going to work. So that is one thing that teachers also need to keep on learning. As a teacher, you can never stop being a student. Otherwise, you will never be a good teacher, right? And another thing is that just like any other industry, this industry is also seeing a lot of rise in customization and personalization. So what I mean by that is, as educational institutes and as teachers, we need to find out a way to give personal attention, personal mentoring and guidance to the students. So at Narayana also we have come up with this mentoring program, right? So that every student's needs that are different can be catered to. Students come from different backgrounds, they have different strengths, different weaknesses. So that personal attention to the student and designing a program, designing a learning experience which is according to their skills is very important. And not just as a teacher, even in educational institutes will have to come up with a way to personalize the learning experience according to the needs and the strengths of the students.
Right. So the way they do their CECs, they go out and
Correct.
meet industry. So the learning methodology will change. It will not
Absolutely,
be
it
towards
will
more
change.
of classroom model delivery. It will be sometimes flipped classroom. Sometimes
yes.
they'll be moving out of the classroom, going
Correct.
interacting with people, coming back, giving their inputs on what they feel,
Yes.
what they studied and what they experienced,
Exactly.
and how to bridge this gap. All of those activities will, I think,
And bringing about a flexibility. So even when I'm designing an assignment, I need to be careful that there is certain kind of flexibility where every student will be able to do the same assignment but with the different techniques, with different tools which they are more comfortable with, which they want to learn, right? So one system applies to everyone doesn't work anymore. So bringing about that flexibility in the teaching patterns, in the teaching pedagogy, in the assignments, in the syllabus is going to be important.
Even we used to do a lot of Audi sessions, auditorium sessions where the entire batch, a guest would come, and I think this is the thing of an old time that today happens. But okay, I'll share what changed and how things have to be changed with the passage of time. Is like we used to do a lot of sessions in the auditorium when some guests would come, and all the students would be there in the auditorium listening at that conversation. Somehow I experienced and saw that the engagement is going down because people feel, again, what you said, why are they sitting in that auditorium, right? If a marketing personnel is there, and also depends on time. So example, if it is the foundation year, then they'll be interested to learn all the subjects. But if he's heading towards the second year and understanding he wants to specialize into finance, now I understood that probably why the marketing guy does not want to sit in the finance session, because he does not align himself or does not recognize himself to be so interested to listen to that person. We kind of created another format of conversation called as cafe conversations or boardroom conversations, where now we are only looking at those group of 25-30 students who are, example, I have an FMCG expert coming from an industry. Rather than having an FMCG session for entire batch, I would have just 25-30 people who are interested and who are exploring to build their career in FMCG. Now, the moment that we did this roundtable conversation kind of thing, close environment, cozy environment, students actually started to open up and ask a lot of questions. And even I had to convince first, but later after the session, they were so happy. The industry people were so happy that they literally said that after so many years, I literally engaged with a lot of students and conversation, which is not possible. And that's technically also not possible. People think that why should I ask a question amongst 300 students just to prove I am very smart? They think that way, right? So I think, but when they had a scope where they thought that if they ask a question, there will be a time and attention that can be given to answer my question. That's why asking my questions is more relevant. I think this kind of format changes, sending people and the learning by doing, all of this is important changes that has to be done for the classrooms of future, or rather the learnings of future. I would say classrooms is no more a center point of learning nowadays. We go for a heritage walk. All of this is a learning method that we do, how to learn and how to gain skills and knowledge about it. All right, ma'am, we are now in the last phase of our conversation, which is a rapid fire round. I'll have some questions for you which requires absolutely zero filters in the answer. So let's get started for that. So my first question is the emotion that most Indian workplaces are terrible at handling. One word.
Anger.
A corporate buzzword you wish you would quietly disappear for.
There's no place for emotions at workplace.
If emotion had job titles, which emotion would be the CEO of your life right now?
For me, it would be PPO, People's Patience Officer. Patience is driving me right now. So,
Oh, the entire generation needs it. A book that made you cry and what it taught you about people that no research paper ever could.
I read a lot of fiction and I cry with a lot of them. So, a lot of books have made me cry. What I've learned, I would say recently I read a trilogy, which is the Dragon Heart trilogy by Nora Roberts. It is where the main character goes through a journey of self discovery and self awareness. So, that is something that has stayed with me for quite some time now. So,
The most emotionally unintelligent thing a leader can say to their team without even realizing it.
this is how things are done in the corporate. Get over it.
If NBS had an EI score as an institution, what would it be out of 10 right now?
I would say 8. We are a very people centric culture, and the leadership provides us with a no judgment, psychological, safe culture wherein we can talk about what we need, how we feel, we can have great work life balance. So, all in all, we are doing very good when it comes to having emotional intelligence as a part of our culture. Definitely an 8.
Right, we are students organization.
Absolutely.
Great, happy to hear that from you. The one life advice you were given that you completely ignored and you were right to prove it.
I have ignored a lot of advices in my life. I give a lot of advices, I don't take a lot of advices. I think it started with take science, don't go for commerce. Started with now you're going for commerce, at least enroll into CA or CAS. HR has no scope, do not go for HR. Get married, at least put in some makeup for the event, and the list goes on. I don't follow any of these.
Can't hear it often. The most surprising thing a student has ever taught you, something that you had nothing to do with your subject.
This is something we discussed before also. Students can surprise you, right? So don't be too quick to judge a student.
You get one billboard, what does it say? And
About me?
yes.
Okay, so this is also on my LinkedIn, so a lot of people might have seen it, but teaching is not a career, it's a lifestyle choice.
Can you explain?
A lot of people think about teaching as a profession, as a career, just like any other career, but you are dealing with students, so you cannot think of it as a career, right? It becomes a part of who you are, and unless that happens, you can never be a good teacher. So at the end of the day, once you get into this profession and you've been doing it for quite some time, it is a part of your life. It becomes a part of who you are as a person.
That's it, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you for gracefully taking all our questions and patiently answering like a people's patience officer. It was really, I equally enjoyed the conversation and learning, and I'm really sure that the people who are watching this podcast will learn few things out of your life journey, and we look forward to know something more in future. Thank you for today.
Thank you so much for having me here. It was a pleasure talking to you. So thank you once again.
Thank you guys. We'll see you at the another episode of The Valuable Conversation. Until then, check out our previous episodes and stay connected. Thank you.